Power is often loud. It announces itself with threats, with displays of force, with men who believe that fear is the same thing as respect. But real power, the kind that shapes destinies and survives generations, rarely raises its voice. It waits. It listens. And when it finally acts, the world realizes it was never in doubt. What you are about to hear is not just a story about authority or crime. It is a story about restraint, honor, and a decision so unexpected that even today it feels almost impossible. A teacher writes a letter. A man known as the most feared leader in his world receives it, and instead of reacting the way power usually does, he chooses a path no modern leader of influence would dare to follow. As you listen, leave a comment with what power means to you: fear, respect, or responsibility. If stories that reveal the hidden side of iconic figures interest you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts below. Your voice becomes part of this conversation. Don Vito Corleone was never interested in being the loudest man in the room. His reputation did not come from screaming orders or spilling blood unnecessarily. It came from something far rarer: consistency. In a world ruled by impulse, he ruled by patience. While others built empires on intimidation, he built his on understanding human nature. Every favor granted, every word spoken, every silence held carried weight. To outsiders, he was a criminal mastermind. To those who truly knew him, he was something more complex, a man bound by an internal law that never needed to be written down. He believed that power without honor was fragile, and that authority without responsibility was nothing more than chaos wearing a suit. The letter arrived quietly. No threats, no demand, just words written by a teacher who had reached the end of his options. Someone under his care had been wronged, overlooked, crushed by a system that rewarded influence instead of merit. Courts were slow. Institutions were deaf. And so, reluctantly, he wrote to a man whose name was spoken in whispers. The teacher did not flatter him. He did not beg. He appealed to something deeper, something almost forgotten in the modern world: conscience. He spoke of fairness, of a young life slipping into despair, of how silence from those with power can be more violent than any action. Don Vito read the letter carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not mock it. He did not hand it off to an underling. He understood something that many leaders today have forgotten. When someone reaches out in desperation, how you respond defines who you are far more than what you control. He thought of his own childhood, of injustice endured without protection, of how easily the world discards the powerless. He knew that true authority is tested not when it benefits you, but when it costs you something. In his world, problems were often solved with force: a command, a warning, an example made in the dark. But this situation required none of that. Violence would have been easy. Fear would have been efficient. Yet Don Vito saw that fear ends stories, while respect allows them to continue. So he chose a different path, one that did not increase his wealth, one that did not expand his territory, one that would never appear in headlines or legends whispered in alleyways. He made calls not to threaten, but to listen. He asked questions instead of issuing orders. He sought understanding where others would have demanded obedience. And in doing so, he reminded everyone involved that power can correct without destroying, and that influence does not need to humiliate to be effective. The teacher would never fully know what happened behind closed doors. He would only see the outcome: a situation quietly resolved, a future restored, a burden lifted without spectacle. This decision revealed the core of Don Vito Corleone's philosophy. He did not believe leadership existed to dominate. He believed it existed to stabilize. Chaos was the enemy, not people. And the strongest leaders were those who absorbed disorder so others could live in peace. In a time where authority often seeks applause, Don Vito sought balance. Where modern power demands visibility, he preferred discretion. And where many leaders today act to protect their image, he acted to protect his principles. But this choice did not come without consequences. Every act of restraint reshapes expectation. Every merciful decision invites new responsibilities. And as Don Vito would soon discover, choosing honor over fear sets forces in motion that cannot be easily undone. The resolution of the teacher's problem did not echo through the streets. There were no rumors, no warnings passed in coded language, no sudden displays of obedience meant to impress. And yet, within Don Vito Corleone's world, something shifted. Men who believed power was proven only through fear began to sense that a different standard had been reinforced. Not spoken aloud, but understood. When power chooses restraint, it confuses those who depend on intimidation to feel strong. Don Vito never explained his reason. He never gathered his family to justify the choice, never delivered a speech about ethics or compassion. He believed that explanations weaken authority when they are not required. What mattered was not that others understood his reasoning, but that they understood his line. There were things he would do without hesitation, and things he would never do, no matter how convenient they seemed. That clarity more than violence kept his empire intact. Within the organization, younger men whispered questions they dared not ask directly. Why help someone who could offer nothing in return? Why intervene without extracting loyalty, money, or leverage? To them, leadership was transactional. Every action had to produce visible profit. Don Vito knew better. He understood that the most valuable returns are often invisible until it is too late to create them. Trust, stability, reputation. These were currencies far more enduring than cash. He had learned long ago that fear is expensive. It must be constantly reinforced. The moment it fades, rebellion begins. Respect, however, compounds over time. It grows quietly, strengthens loyalty, and survives moments of weakness. The teacher's letter was not an interruption of his rule. It was a test of it. And by passing that test, Don Vito sent a message far more powerful than any threat. He showed that his authority was not reactive. It was deliberate. In private moments, he reflected on the nature of leadership itself. He saw how men in positions of power often confuse control with dominance, mistaking obedience for loyalty. They surround themselves with noise, with flattery, with constant affirmation. Don Vito avoided this trap. He valued silence because silence reveals truth. When people speak less, their actions speak more clearly, and the actions surrounding him began to change. Those who dealt with him noticed something unsettling. He did not rush. He did not escalate. He did not need to prove himself. Where others panicked under pressure, he became calmer. Where others sought revenge for every slight, he measured consequences across years, not days. This patience was not weakness. It was discipline sharpened by experience. He knew that a leader who reacts emotionally is already losing control. The teacher, unaware of these deeper implications, simply returned to his life. The student he worried about regained opportunities. Doors reopened that had once seemed permanently closed. The system corrected itself, quietly, almost as if it had remembered how it was supposed to function. From the outside, it looked like luck. From the inside, it was intention. Don Vito believed that the best outcomes are those that feel natural, not forced. But such decisions never exist in isolation. Acts of mercy reshape expectations. Word spreads even when names are not mentioned. Others began to wonder if appeals based on fairness rather than fear might be heard. And while Don Vito never encouraged this, he understood the risk. Leadership is not about avoiding burden. It is about choosing which burdens you are willing to carry. He accepted that responsibility without complaint. At the same time, enemies watched closely. They mistook restraint for hesitation. They believed that any deviation from brutality was an opening. History is full of men who misread calm as weakness, and Don Vito knew this pattern well. He allowed them to believe what they wanted. Confidence, after all, does not require constant correction. When the moment came, clarity would arrive on its own. This balance between compassion and control defined his legacy. He did not see morality as softness, nor power as cruelty. To him, there were tools, each useless without the other. The teacher's letter had reminded him of something essential. Authority that serves only itself collapses under its own weight. Authority that serves order endures. And as tensions quietly began to rise around him, it became clear that this single decision would soon be tested in ways no one could have predicted. The calm that followed was deceptive. On the surface, Don Vito Corleone's world appeared unchanged, but beneath it, expectations were shifting. Power always creates ripples, even when it moves silently. Those who benefited from his restraint felt a renewed sense of loyalty, while those who relied on fear felt uncertain. And uncertainty, more than anger, destabilizes men who build their authority on intimidation. Don Vito understood this better than anyone. He had spent decades observing how people respond when they realize brute force is no longer the only language being spoken. Some grow uneasy, sensing that their methods are becoming obsolete. Others adapt, learning that intelligence and patience can be more effective than threats. Leadership, in Don Vito's view, was not about freezing the world in place. It was about guiding its evolution without losing control. The letter from the teacher had become a quiet symbol of that philosophy. Inside his family, the contrast between generations grew sharper. Younger leaders were impatient. They lived in a time that rewarded speed, visibility, and decisive aggression. They questioned whether discretion still had value in a world that demanded constant dominance. Don Vito listened to these concerns without interruption. He never dismissed them outright. Instead, he allowed reality to answer on his behalf. Time, he believed, is the most honest judge. He watched as rivals made predictable mistakes. They escalated conflicts unnecessarily. They humiliated allies in public to appear strong. They confused intimidation with control. Each error reinforced Don Vito's conviction that power does not need to announce itself. It needs to be understood. When people know exactly where you stand, they regulate themselves. Fear forces obedience. Clarity creates order. The teacher's case resurfaced unexpectedly in a conversation with a trusted associate. Not as praise, not as criticism, but as curiosity. Why intervene at all? Don Vito answered with a single sentence that revealed more than any explanation could. He said that when authority refuses to listen, it becomes indistinguishable from chaos. For him, leadership began with attention. He had learned this lesson early in life, long before influence came to him naturally. As a young man, he watched institutions fail ordinary people. He saw how systems built to protect often serve those who already hold advantage. That memory never left him. It shaped his belief that power must compensate for imbalance, not exploit it. The letter was not an exception. It was a confirmation. This philosophy placed him at odds with modern interpretations of dominance. Leaders today often protect their image first, their principles second. They avoid involvement unless there is something to gain publicly. Don Vito moved in the opposite direction. He believed that the most important decisions are the ones no one applauds. Legacy to him was not measured in recognition, but in stability. As tensions grew, a test approached. A situation emerged where retaliation was expected. Allies anticipated a swift and forceful response. Enemies waited, confident that restraint had softened him. Don Vito saw the moment clearly. This was where his choices would either validate his authority or undermine it, and he did not hesitate. He prepared, quietly and thoroughly, not with rage but with precision. Those closest to him noticed the difference. There was no impulsiveness, no emotional escalation. Every step was calculated, every consequence weighed. This was not contradiction, it was consistency. Mercy had not weakened him, it had refined his judgment. Strength, he believed, is proven by control under pressure. When action finally came, it was decisive and limited. No excess, no spectacle, just enough to restore balance. Those who had mistaken restraint for vulnerability understood their error too late. Those who had doubted his leadership saw its full dimension. He had shown that compassion and firmness are not opposites, they are complements. Power guided by ethics does not hesitate when boundaries are crossed. In the aftermath, silence returned, but it was a different silence, one filled with understanding. The teacher's letter, the quiet intervention, the controlled response all formed a single message. Don Vito Corleone did not rule through impulse. He ruled through principle. And as the world around him continued to change, one truth became undeniable. Leaders who abandon restraint lose authority. Leaders who master it define eras. The consequences of that controlled response lingered longer than the act itself. Don Vito Corleone understood that leadership is never judged only by what is done, but by what follows. Stability returned, yet it carried a new weight. People no longer questioned whether he could be ruthless. They questioned whether they deserved his restraint. That shift changed everything. Within his circle, behavior adjusted without orders being given. Men spoke more carefully. Decisions were thought through before being brought to him. Recklessness, once excused as ambition, became a liability. Don Vito did not need to enforce this change. His example had done the work for him. When a leader's standards are clear, discipline becomes internal rather than imposed. This was the kind of control most leaders never achieve. He often reflected on how rare this balance truly was. History is crowded with powerful figures who ruled briefly and collapsed violently. They mistook domination for leadership and fear for loyalty. Their names survived only as warnings. Don Vito had no interest in being remembered that way. He believed that endurance was the highest form of success. To endure, power must be predictable, fair, and restrained. The teacher's letter remained in his thoughts, not as sentiment, but as principle. It reminded him that authority exists within a larger human context. Every decision radiates outward, touching lives the leader will never see. Most powerful men distance themselves from this reality. They insulate their conscience. Don Vito did the opposite. He allowed responsibility to sharpen his awareness. That awareness became his greatest advantage. Modern leaders often surround themselves with advisors who echo their desires. Don Vito preferred those who challenged him quietly and truthfully. He did not punish disagreement. He punished dishonesty. This distinction mattered. Truth, even when uncomfortable, preserved order. Lies, even when flattering, created decay. His leadership was not emotional. It was ethical. As time passed, stories circulated about him that felt contradictory to outsiders. He was described as merciless and compassionate, calculating and principled, feared and respected. Don Vito saw no contradiction at all. He believed that complexity was not a weakness, but a requirement. Simplistic leaders are easy to predict. Predictability invites challenge. Depth, however, creates caution. He watched the world accelerate around him. Power became louder, faster, more performative. Leaders competed for visibility instead of effectiveness. Decisions were made for applause, not consequence. Don Vito found this deeply flawed. Authority, in his view, should reduce noise, not contribute to it. The quieter the leader, the more stable the system. The teacher never knew how close his letter had come to being ignored by the chaos of the world. What saved it was not timing, nor luck, but alignment. It reached a man whose values were already set. Don Vito did not change because of the letter. The letter revealed who he already was. That distinction mattered. As age weighed on him, Don Vito became more selective with his words. Silence grew longer but more meaningful. Those who truly listened learned that leadership is not about constant action. It is about knowing when action is necessary and when it would cause harm. Most failures of power come from unnecessary movement. He knew his time would not last forever. No leader escapes that truth. What concerned him was not succession of position, but succession of philosophy. Would the next generation understand that authority without honor is hollow? That fear creates enemies faster than it creates order? These questions remained unanswered, and as the future pressed closer, one final realization began to take shape. The greatest legacy a leader can leave is not wealth, territory, or reputation. It is a standard, a line that others hesitate to cross, a principle that survives after the man is gone. Don Vito Corleone had drawn that line long ago. The world was only beginning to understand it. In the end, Don Vito Corleone understood something that most powerful men never do. Authority is temporary. Influence is conditional, but character is permanent. It does not depend on titles, fear, or visibility. It reveals itself only through choices made when no one is watching, when there is nothing to gain, and when the easier path is to ignore, destroy, or dominate. The teacher's letter was one of those moments. What made his response extraordinary was not that he intervened, but how he did it. He did not turn compassion into spectacle. He did not demand loyalty in exchange for fairness. He did not rewrite the event to strengthen his myth. He allowed the outcome to stand on its own, quiet and complete. That restraint is what separated him from men who merely hold power. Modern leadership often mistakes activity for effectiveness. Decisions are rushed, amplified, broadcast. Leaders fear silence because silence offers no validation. Don Vito embraced silence because it allowed reflection. He knew that the strongest form of control is self-control. Without it, power consumes itself. As his life moved toward its later chapter, the lessons he embodied became clearer. Violence had always been available to him, yet it was never his foundation. Negotiation was not weakness. Mercy was not surrender. Listening was not submission. These were tools of stability, not sentimentality. He understood that fear can open doors, but it cannot keep them open. Those who studied his rule closely noticed a paradox. The less he spoke, the more his words mattered. The fewer actions he took, the more decisive each one became. This was not decline. It was refinement. Power, when matured, becomes efficient. It wastes nothing. The teacher returned to his classroom, unaware that his letter had intersected with a philosophy forged over a lifetime. His problem had been solved, but something larger had occurred. A reminder had been issued, not just to Don Vito, but to anyone who believes leadership is about dominance rather than responsibility. True authority listens before it commands. Don Vito Corleone never believed himself to be a moral symbol. He did not seek admiration or absolution. He sought order, and he believed order could only exist when power respected the human cost of its decision. That belief defined him more than fear ever could. In a world increasingly obsessed with force, speed, and spectacle, his example feels almost anachronistic. Yet it endures because it touches something fundamental. People do not remember who shouted the loudest. They remember who acted with restraint when restraint was hardest. They remember who protected dignity when it offered no reward. The teacher's letter was answered not with authority, but with leadership, not with intimidation, but with understanding. And that is why it remains so unsettling even today, because it exposes an uncomfortable truth. Most leaders of power could have acted. Very few would have chosen to listen. Don Vito Corleone showed that real strength does not need to announce itself. It does not rush. It does not seek applause. It stands firm, absorbs pressure, and acts only when action preserves balance. Honor sustained his power. Character sustained his legacy. And perhaps that is the lesson that lingers long after the story ends. Power fades, fear collapses, influence shifts, but principles endure, and the men who truly understand leadership do not need to prove it. They simply remain.